Hi everybody, Rob Sutherland here from Good Dirt Clay Studio. I'm going to show you today how to make a bowl with flutes on the outside. And we're going to use a special tool. I have one here that I made myself from a regular rib. I can hold it closer to the camera. I've just carved little swoops out of it and left ridges in the middle. And that's going to allow me to create the design that I'm after. You can get a very good substitute from the cake decorating section of the craft store. And this is just a little, I assume, for icing. It works just like a rib, and I used this before I made my own. I've got about 2 pounds of clay, and I'm gonna go ahead and show you how this is done on the wheel. Hopefully all the instructions are gonna be perfectly clear, but if not, don't hesitate to reach out via email or from the comment section on this video, and I will get back to you and hopefully clarify. I'm going to make sure that this is fairly accurately centered. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it'll just make everything easier if it is. Really anchoring my right hand down to the wheel and pressing everything into the shape of my right hand. Keeping this sponge handy so I can dispense water like that if I get dry. Now, I will be trimming a foot on this bowl, so I'm going to leave about a ½ inch in the bottom, and I also am going to be opening like a bowl, but then I'm going to pull it directly upward like a cylinder before I make the alteration with that special rib. So this is what it's going to look like. I'm going to open down, keeping everything really anchored so my opening goes in the middle and stays there. Gonna actually check the thickness so I don't get a surprise later and find that I have less than a ½ inch. And I currently have more like 5/8, so I'm gonna go a little tiny bit deeper. And then I will open with my hand flat and slightly recurved backwards so that I create a rounded opening, not a corner like I would for a cylinder. And I'll just work that curve until I'm happy. But here's where it deviates from a typical bowl that I would just throw outward. I'm actually gonna get in cylinder pulling position, de-emphasize my inside hand, and just sort of haul this clay upward. The goal is not to make it overly thin because I'm gonna have to stretch it into a bowl later, so I'm gonna be good about leaving some wall thickness. That just pulled it all right back in, and then I'm gonna draw it up, leaving it nice and thick, particularly at the rim. And usually one pull is all it needs. I'm just going to double check that I haven't left a lot of weight down here in the bottom because that's just going to waste clay. So I'll reach down in there. I'm not going to push a corner into it with the inside hand. I'm just going to squeeze with the outside hand. And yeah, I can draw a little bit more clay up into my wall. And leave it chunky. So it looks nothing like a bowl right now. I'm going to collar it in so it's even less like a bowl. But when I'm putting in the flutes, if my walls aren't straight up and down, if I start at the bottom and it gets wider, my flutes won't get wider. They're just going to stay the same. So the cylinder has to be pretty accurate and vertical. You don't have to trim the clay off the base, but if you do, it gives you the option of not trimming the outside of the foot, and that can be kind of nice. If you get a really good flute job that goes all the way down to the bottom, sometimes you want to just leave the outside of the bowl that you threw as the final foot. So I'm going to just take my wood knife and slice this thing, continue my cylinder straight down. So I have the option. I can always come back in and trim it more later if I decide I want to. So that just peels off neatly. Didn't really talk about that specific technique, but holding my my wooden knife like a pencil and cutting with the side of the knife resting against the pot as I went down. I was actually slicing the clay off rather than scraping it away. And that is definitely my preference. I'm gonna come in with a metal rib and just scrape the outside nice and dry. And here's where my little homemade rib gets to have its moment to shine. I like to dampen it because the wood's a little thirsty and it'll stick to the clay if I don't. I'm gonna put hands on the inside. I don't really care what happens to the inside because I'm gonna come in there with a rib and stretch it way out. So I can make a mess of the inside and it'll be fine in the finished product. And I wanna have something to kind of press against. So I'm gonna push this against the base and slide it all the way up. And I'm actually gonna leave through the rim. I'm gonna turn it so you can see how that looks. Almost everything I do, I would say stop before the rim, but I really like the way this tool kind of comes through the rim and thins the rim. It makes for an edge it is admittedly less durable than one where I stopped and left it really solid and thick at the rim, but I really love the way it looks going through the top. So I'm sacrificing a little bit of functionality for my aesthetic preference. So I'm gonna come around the rest of the way, and I'm not gonna belabor this or worry too much. I'm just gonna come up and make these marks, trying to go vertically. Every once in a while I want to come in with my sponge and remove any loose clay. I'm going to try to do one a little bit on the far side of the wheel so you can see better how I'm doing it. Normally I would do this at 3 o'clock, kind of sighting down from above, make sure I'm coming up as straight as possible. Just a few more. All right. So you can see there's some variation in that. They're not all perfectly vertical, and that's perfectly okay. I'm not actually trying to machine it to look like a column. I am just trying to produce this, this sort of nice, loose, almost like a draping fabric or something on the outside. And if you want to spend more time being super accurate, that could be your stylistic choice. Going in and drying some water out of the inside. From here on out, I am not allowed to touch the outside of this pot. I'm also not even going to touch the rim. I'm just going to stretch from the inside out. And I'm going to use this rib. There are other ribs I could use. I've got some that are made out of coconut shell that have got a concave and a convex side. Just for simplicity, and since a lot of you guys have these Cheryl mud tools, which are wonderful, I'm going to use this. I want to brace myself, so my right arm's on my thigh, my right hand is coming up to kind of grab my left wrist, and I am going to start by just stretching the rim out. You don't want to stretch lower down until you get that rim out there. So slowly release it, clean off the rib, and now I can come farther down and stretch it into more of a cone. So it's at this point not really much of a bowl, but it's heading in the right direction. And I want to continue to bring the rim out and then straighten it up into kind of more of a conical shape. Rim out, conical, rim out, and eventually I'll put a nice curve into it. Here comes the next rim stretch. I'll take that way out and then sight along it and try to make it as conical as possible. You'll notice I'm using a fairly fast wheel speed, and I'm being really careful to keep this edge of the tool nice and clean. I don't want to let that clay build up because clay will stick to itself. I don't know if you can tell, it looks like you can see it in the screen. Those things that were vertical, those flutes, are now doing this really elegant sort of twist around the form. And for me, that's the thing that makes this a really attractive technique. So here I go, stretching the rim again, leaning it out there as far as I feel comfortable going. And I'm going to come down to the inside. Connect the dots between the bottom and the top. And it's now actually starting to look like a bowl instead of a cylinder. And that was the advantage of starting out with a curved interior, is it allows me to continue working this curve and not run into some kind of weird corner down at the bottom. I'm gonna get my head down where I can see, and I am starting to find that attractive. I don't know that I need to bring the rim out much more. I think I'm gonna take it out just a hair, finish that curve out, and I'm gonna resist the temptation to run the chamois on this rim. It's got a couple little goobery spots, but I think if I run the chamois over it, I'm gonna destroy a lot of the character of that rim. So hold me to that. Stretching it out. I don't know if you can see, but my rib on the inside is not straight up and down where that edge is just scraping. I have it laid down really flat where it's kind of mushing the curve down. And that's pretty important. You don't want to just scrape clay away. You want to actually displace the clay. You just have to be really careful about the part of the rib that you're not using. You want to have a nice broad contact area, but pay attention to this back corner, because if it crosses over the center line, it'll catch on the other side, and a lot of people get afraid of using the rib because they've caught too many times. As long as I stay on the line between the center and 3 o'clock and I watch that contact point, of course, as soon as I started talking about it, I went overboard and caught a little bit. Not too bad. Put a little swirl in it. I'm starting to see little shadows at the rim where the space between my flutes is getting precariously thin. So that's a good time to cool it and call it done if you're happy enough with the shape. Obviously, if you're not happy with the shape, you can push it, and if it dies, it dies. That's why we learned how to wedge. I wanted to give myself a little bit more fullness of curve before I quit, but I left the rim alone. And I'm not going to do anything at the base with a wood knife. My flutes come all the way down to the bottom. Potentially that fluted outside edge could be my, my final foot where there's no trimming visible. I think if I'm going to go for that, I'm going to try to push it down a little bit more. So I'm going to get where I can actually see what's happening. I'm actually looking at the outside profile to tell what I'm doing. Yeah, that makes it look a little bit more like a distinct foot at the bottom. It's risky. The more you push down on that lower part of the curve, the more it can sit down on you and collapse. But all right, that is more what I had in mind. So, fluted bowl, my flutes come through the rim. I throw it as a bowl to begin with, opening, pull it as a cylinder, leave it nice and thick. I was actually reaching the limit of what I can do with that stretch, both here and here. If I had made a thinner wall to begin with, this would have torn a long time ago, and I wouldn't have gotten that lovely twist as the flutes come up the form. So that is the technique for these fluted bowls. They are fairly functional. I did mention that they're slightly less durable. I've chipped one that I've been using at home for a year or two, but I think in some ways it's worth it, especially if you're making it for yourself, to just go for it and make what you think looks nice. I'm going to pick up the camera and get you a close-up view. Don't forget, you can reach out to me via email or also through the comments in this video. Get this spinning for you so you can see what's going on. And that is the Floated Bowl project. Thanks so much for watching, and don't hesitate to reach out with questions. Thanks so much.